Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to discuss Paladin tanking threat. So this is where you need to make sure that the enemy is attacking you and not your allies. Here be a quick example in the new trial, the latest Zemnid's Reliquary. We grab the attention of the beholder, we need to make sure he's always attacking us. If he goes and hits our teammates, well, they're probably going to get one shot by any of his standard attacks. He has an at-will attack called Eyes of his Beholder, which is going to be hitting you with all the time. He's going to put disintegrated armor on you, so on and so forth. All these attacks where you want to have a tank absorbing them, not a damage dealer or a healer where they'll just end up dying to them. So you need to make sure the target's attacking you and not your allies. How do we do that? Well, by getting as much effective damage on the target as possible. Whoever has dealt the most effective damage or the most effective healing has the highest threat and is the target of the boss. So we need to compete with damage dealers with our damage. How do we do this? Well, through powers that have increased threat. Anything like Oath Strike, which says it has increased threat, basically has its damage multiplied by a hidden value, and that is the amount of damage the enemy thinks you deal against it. Take Templars Wrath, for example. It has increased threat, and let's say you do 100,000 damage with it. And if this increased threat is to times 8, then you've actually done 800,000 damage to the target. Well, that's what the target thinks you've dealt. This is what allows you to keep on top of effectively the damage board against the DPS. Whoever's done the most gets attacked by the boss. Now you will have some other powers which will allow you to place yourself on top of the threat list, regardless of how much you've done with damage previously. However, it is dependent on whoever else is on the threat list. That's your healers, your other tanks, and your other damage dealers. Also yourself, I've tested. Now what this means is it will put you 10% higher than the person with the most effective damage dealt to the boss. So if somebody's on 1,000,000, you'll get put 10% above that to 1,100,000. So on a Paladin tank, we have a bunch of threat powers that we need to use. We have our Oath Strike, which is our at-will we can use all the time. We have Templars Wrath with increased threat. We have our Sacred Weapon combined with Defeat, Sacred Shield to give it increased threat. And then you can see it has that effect right there. And then we also have Intimidating Presence, greatly increasing threat generated. Outside of that, we have Vow of Enmity to place ourselves on top of the threat list, along with Smite combined with Divine Challenger to also place us on top of the threat list. I've explained what that does already. But we need to see what are the values for this increased threat. How effective are they? Do they really increase your threat by much? And we need to then compare them against other sources so that you know which powers to prioritize in order to deal the most effective damage. And well, we have our document right here of my testing and just using our Valorous Strike. So this is just an attack without increased threat. So that's this one right here. We can determine our base increased threat because as a tank, we have Oath of Protection, which just increases our threat. All damage we output is increased by this hidden value, which when we go and test is actually 900% for the Paladin. This is a unique feature for the Paladin, so it could be different on the other tanking classes. So it's 900% or times 9. So any damage we deal is multiplied by 900%. So if we deal like nearly 200,000 damage, multiply that by 900% and we've dealt like 1.8 million damage effectively. That's what the enemy thinks you've dealt. So then we check it with Oath Strike, which has increased threat. So you're stacking the bonuses of increased threat from the at-will with the Oath of Protection. They get multiplied together. So you end up with something like this. 800% from Oath Strike, because that's its own increased threat ability, plus the 900% from your Oath of Protection. Not plus, multiply. So you only have to do like 32,000 damage, and you have actually dealt like 2.3 million effective damage. So if a DPS comes along, you only need to deal that much and they have to deal that much to match you on the threat list. Again, whoever is higher has the enemy's threat, has their attention, is going to be attacked by them. Then you have Templars Wrath, which is just your encounter power right here with increased threat. This also has 800% like you have with Oath Strike, and again is also multiplied by your global threat modifier, your Oath of Protection, which again multiplies all your damage by that. So yeah, like hit with 91,000 and you've actually done like 6.6 million damage to your target. That's what makes this power so good, just to gain that threat at the beginning of a fight. You can use it like 3 times back to back because of the divinity cost is 300 and you have a divinity pool of 1,000, and you'll very quickly get a 4th cast and then a 5th cast of that in a fight. You'll see that in this phase right here. We're going again in the new trial, and you have to take attention of 2 targets in quick succession. Here we're using like our mount, our artifact, 3 Templars Wrath plus our belt item, and then move on to the next beholder, dump our daily power on him, quickly get our next Templars Wrath, although we ended up getting turned to stone. Luckily the damage dealers, none of them get to the top of the threat list. And you can see who's on top of the threat list if we pause right here by looking at the little bubbles above their name. Whenever you're looking at your target, so this is this beholder, whoever's red has that target's attention. That's me right now. That's good. I'm doing my job. Everybody else, you can see their bar is filling up. When it gets halfway full, it'll turn to yellow. And when they turn to orange, when their yellow bar is full, that's when they're within 10% of taking the threat from you. They're within 10% of your effective damage. You can see going to the main beholder here, a bunch of them are on yellow, but it's pretty safe. They still have quite a long ways to go in dealing damage to catch up with me. So we're pretty happy here. Don't have to use our divinity to use more Templars Wrath. We don't need to get much higher on the threat list as of now. Just keep an eye out on that. And that's something really important to watch out for, those little bubbles there. We've switched so that the other tank has the threat, and you can see now I'm yellow because he's taken the threat. So when it's my turn to take it back, as we do now, you can see I use that vow and it jumps me to the top of the threat list. And that's what you're going to have to learn in a trial as well. And here we're on a voice call and we can communicate when we're switching so we don't get confused. Did a damage dealer in the other party that we cannot see take the threat? I would like an option to be able to show all party members on the left side there that are in a trial, all 10. That could make it a lot easier for a tank to moderate who has what threat on the target. For example, I could have a damage dealer in the other party getting really high on the threat list and I wouldn't see it because I can't see the threat meter. So let's move back to our threat powers. We have Sacred Weapon, which we can combine with Sacred Shield to give it increased threat. Now be aware, you only deal this extra magnitude when you have the effect of Sacred Weapon active and you hit stuff whenever you deal damage actively, not passively like getting hit through Binding Oath. And this damage, extra damage 52, is only affected by the increased threat from Sacred Weapon, not affected by like Templars Wrath increased threat or Oath Strike increased threat, and vice versa. That increased threat from Sacred Weapon is only going to affect the damage from Sacred Weapon, not your Oath Strike or your Templars Wrath. So it's a bit underwhelming, and the modifier with that is only 400%, half as effective as Sacred Weapon and Templars Wrath. It'll help, but not by a whole lot. And we do have another threat power, a threat feature, which is supposed to increase the threat of the healing you deal with Divine Touch. But this is bugged to all hell and hasn't been even looked at in forever. I need to make a proper bug report on it and potentially it can get fixed. The way it's working right now is it actually removes your threat. The way this should work is that whenever I heal with, let's say, this power here, I should be able to maintain the threat. But as soon as the bard hits like once, bam, we have no threat. The threat generated through that healing seems to be next to nothing, and slotting this feat seems to do nothing as well. In fact, it even seems to remove our threat. You can see the guy hits us, we heal, and we keep it up, but as soon as this guy hits, our threat's gone. We have 0, none at all. Our bubble should be at least a little bit green if we had any threat at all. So that feature is broken. No point using the feat, no point using the heal power. It's unfortunate because otherwise we could create some sort of hybrid threat heal build, but as it stands, it's pointless and doesn't really work. You cannot really afford to use that divinity on healing versus threat. So lastly, you have intimidating presence. It says it will greatly increase your threat, but in reality, it's only going to increase it by 130%, basically 1.3. So you're going to deal like your standard damage here, and it's only going to be increased by 30% with that massive sacrifice of losing out on the bottom feat, which increases your shield, while in that tab ability, Divine Champion, to 60% instead of 40%, and would also reduce the drain cost. Using this, your drain cost is going to be higher, allowing you to produce less threat, and not worth it then, because you just want to use Divinity for Templars Wrath rather than sitting in a stance and then using Templars Wrath and then not having any divinity left for the stats. It's a bit confusing and a bit silly. Not really sure what the devs were intending by this, especially when it only increases your threat by such a small amount. 130% compared to like 900% or 800% is pretty small. Like, have a look here. Yes, it works. On Templars Wrath, you can see you get your like 9.6 million versus your 7.4 million. So you are gaining like 2 million difference there. It works, but I don't really see any reason to run it. You're just draining your divinity while in that stance, and you're better off just using that divinity to generate more threat through like casting more Templars Wrath. So ultimately you end up with this, our little table with the threat multipliers for our Paladin Tank. These are the powers you could use to increase the effective damage you deal. So again, I've been running a ton of this new trial. Even with like a cleric DPS on my party, they're a freaking pain to have threat with. You don't have it as easy as a fighter, not by a long shot, but it's manageable. Maintaining your divinity, getting that balance between using divinity for survivability and divinity for threat. And to be honest, in the new trial, if you got some decent stats, you don't really need your divinity for the protection. You can just dump it all in Templars Wrath and have that threat. You really need it when, especially in phase 4 and 6, fighting these beholders, when you have to split your damage between 2 targets. So just be aware again, you need to be using powers with increased threat to be able to hold the attention of your enemies. If you're just running with Bane, it has slightly higher magnitude, but that's slightly higher. You're going from 400 to 620. A 220 magnitude increase is nowhere near compared to the 800% you're getting from Templars Wrath with its increased threat. You're basically looking at 620 versus 3200 magnitude. Now tell me which is better. Same with the Atwills. You're looking at 200 magnitude versus maybe 60 or 60. Just beware. Spamming Smite, read the tooltip, you deal radiant damage to target enemy, magnitude decreases as the remaining divinity decreases. You're not going to be dealing an awful lot of damage with Smite after you've cast it a few times. It's nowhere near as effective as Templars Wrath, with just grabbing that initial boost in threat. And that's all you really need it for, the beginning. Once you have the high threat, you can keep using Vow whenever it's off cooldown, and you can keep the threat combined with your at-will. Very simply. And yeah, I've tested. Does placing a hard taunt put you 10% above your own effective damage? It does indeed. You can see the damage difference here. Like, Drizzt had to deal like 11 million damage to match this, which meant we had the extra 10% from casting Vow. I went in and I cast Templars 3 times and then cast Vow, and that gave us the damage there. It's not equal to this, and it's not equal to this. Like, if you didn't have the 10% added on, you'd be only at 10 million, but we're up there at 11 million because of the 10%, which is equal to what we see. Drizzt had to deal over 11 million damage to be able to get the threat back from me. So it works. You can stack your own hard taunts on top of each other, which means, yes, spamming Smite with Divine Challenger can work as well, but again, nowhere near as effective as just that Templars Wrath right from the start. And trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm running the latest challenging content, and I'm able to hold threat against some of the top damage dealers. I mean, sure, in phase 4 and 6, I'm still struggling a bit against a cleric TPS, but that can all be about coordination. How much threat am I putting on one beholder versus on the other? How much damage is the DPS using on one versus the other? It's not as easy. It's not as easy as just pressing a button and knowing for sure you have the threat of the enemy. That would just make the game really simple. I kind of like how it is. It's a bit of a challenge. You gotta actually monitor your resources in order to make sure you have the threat. On a fighter, they kind of have it pretty easy. Just run Knight's Valor, have a DPS sit next to you, and drain all their threat and stick it on yours. Yeah, kind of a cheat code right there. I would like, you know, the devs to adjust Divine Protector, make it similar to Knight's Valor. Draw the threat of the person you're tethered to, along with not expiring the tether if nobody's close enough to you, because that's a bit of a joke. Bit of a waste of a daily power when you cast this and nobody's near you. The tether's gone, the daily's ended, and nothing happens. But with that, hopefully this has been somewhat insightful to you guys. It should help you a lot to be able to figure out what to use as a paladin. You can't just copy me, of course. You can watch my gameplay runs, and I generally spend quite a lot of time trying to figure out what works best, especially in this new trial. I have over 55 completions now, and that's not without tens of hours of training beforehand as well. But if you have any further questions, feel free to leave them down below and I'll get back to you. Special thank you to all these channel members for their continued support. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.